Let us listen for the word.
Okay, and again, I'll be reading from 1 Samuel 8, 1 through 18. Now it was that when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "Look here, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now then, set up for us a ruler to judge us, like all the heathen nations."
God, give the ruler your justice and your righteousness to a ruler's son. May the next ruler judge your people with righteousness and your afflicted ones with justice. May the mountains raise up well-being for the people and the hills righteousness. May the ruler do justice for the poor of the people, grant deliverance to those born in need, and crush the oppressor.
But the thing was evil in Samuel's sight when they say, "Give us a ruler to judge us." Then Samuel prayed to the Holy One of old.
God, give the ruler your justice and your righteousness to a ruler's son. May the next ruler judge your people with righteousness and your afflicted ones with justice. May the mountains raise up well-being for the people and the hills righteousness. May the ruler do justice for the poor of the people, grant deliverance to those born in need, and crush the oppressor.
And the Holy One said to Samuel, "Hearken to the voice of the people in all that they say to you. For it is not you they have rejected, but it is me they have rejected from ruling over them. Like everything else they have done to me, from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this very day, forsaking me and serving other gods, they are doing the same to you. Now then, hearken to their voice, but you shall testify against them, and show them the judgment of the ruler who shall rule over them."
God, give the ruler your justice and your righteousness to a ruler's son. May the next ruler judge your people with righteousness and your afflicted ones with justice. May the mountains raise up well-being for the people and the hills righteousness. May the ruler do justice for the poor of the people, grant deliverance to those born in need, and crush the oppressor.
So Samuel relayed all the words of the Holy One to the people who were asking him for a ruler. Samuel said, "This will be the judgment of the ruler who will rule over you all. Your sons he will take and set them aside for himself in his chariots and in his cavalry, and to run before his chariots. And he will set aside for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his plowing and to reap his reaping, and to make his furnishings of war and the furnishings of his chariots. Your daughters he will take to be apothecaries and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards. He will take and give to those who serve him. 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards he will take and give to his eunuchs and those he enslaves. Your male slaves and your female slaves, and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take and put them to work. Your flocks he will tithe, and you shall be his slaves. And you all will cry out on the day in the face of your sovereign, whom you have chosen for yourself, and God, whose name is holy, will not answer you all on that day."
God, give the ruler your justice and your righteousness to a ruler's son. May the next ruler judge your people with righteousness and your afflicted ones with justice. May the mountains raise up well-being for the people and the hills righteousness. May the ruler do justice for the poor of the people, grant deliverance to those born in need, and crush the oppressor. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I know it's summertime and some of our families with children are away in exciting places. We heard they're going to stay in a hotel and they're going to go in a pool. So those are like two important things to do this summer. I am sure that you have heard something like this conversation. The child says, "Why can't I have a new phone for my birthday?" The parent says, "Your current phone works, doesn't it?" The child says, "Yes, but I want a phone like Diana has." Or maybe you hear a conversation like this one. Either the husband or the wife, I don't want to pinpoint one of them, either the husband or the wife says, "I think it's time for a new car. Have you seen the Tesla parked in the driveway up the street? Great gas mileage, save the planet." And then the other one says, "Our car only has 45,000 miles on it. Why would we want to replace it now?" And the first spouse says, "I know, but every time we ride by that Tesla, I think to myself, it would be so great to have a car just like that." Wanting something that someone else has. The people of Israel wanted a king, just like any other nations around them. They wanted to be like everyone else. They wanted someone to lead them, someone human being. Ever since the time of Joshua, who led them into the promised land after Moses died, leadership was fairly loosey-goosey for the people of Israel. There were different leaders who would pop up in different parts of the communities. Usually they led people in some kind of a battle over land. And they were called judges. And I know you know and remember some of the big names of the judges: Gideon and Deborah and Samson. Now, the elders of the people, or at least a very vocal group of the elders, felt it was time to consolidate and pull things together under one united monarch. To them, it was time for a monarch who would rule them with justice and righteousness over all of them, like the words of that psalm. They watched the way Samuel's two sons had wandered off of God's path, perverting the judicial system of Israel. Kind of reminds me of a story a couple weeks ago of the sons of Eli, who also wandered off Eli's example of how to follow God. Seems like Samuel is sort of following in Eli's footsteps, even in this way, that his sons have gone astray. So the people watched, and they saw Samuel getting older and older. And they were starting to get concerned about the succession plan. So what's going to happen when Samuel is no longer with us? Samuel's sons were not the right answer. "Give us a king," they said. "We need a centralized leader, just like the other nations around us. We want to be like them." Now, Samuel didn't think that was a good idea. After all, God, the King of Israel, is the Holy One of old, is the monarch who leads the people. They're wanting to replace their relationship with the Holy One with a human power. Samuel didn't like that idea at all. Samuel was the wise voice here. Samuel was the one who wanted to guide the people in the right direction. Or was it really that Samuel kind of liked being the revered leader of the people and wanted to stay as long as he could? Or was it that deep down he wanted his prodigal sons to succeed him despite their current behavior? Maybe they'll turn the corner. God, on the other hand, instructs Samuel to listen to the people's request. Literally, in the Hebrew, to obey them in what they're asking for. God, the parent, the sovereign over all, is willing to give Israel, the children, the freedom to make their own decisions. Kind of like parents of a teenager who allow him to make a decision that they know will bring negative consequences. Maybe purchasing a first car without thinking through all of the expenses that are going to go along with that purchase. Parents the world over, in any culture, have to determine where is the line between allowing a child to make her own choice and then face the repercussions of that choice, and putting their feet down and saying, no, it's not going to be this way, because we know what's the safest and the best and the most positive decision to make. But when children make a bad decision, the parents also often suffer with the fallout. And you can probably think of examples in your own life. God, the parent, suffered rejection as the leader of the children of Israel. Seems like the repercussions of decisions have effect and impact on multiple levels. Samuel sees this request like a child asking a parent for something bigger, something better, in order to exchange it for what the child already has that maybe just might be working just fine. But God tells Samuel to not feel like the people are rejecting him as the human leader, because they're really rejecting God's kingship or God's reign. And this is not new for God. God has been with these people through thick and through thin. And the people of Israel, many times when you read through the scriptures, had turned their back on God. They had complained to God that things were not going their way. And they had effectively rejected God's leadership again and again. Over Samuel's misgivings, God says yes to the request for a human king. God says yes, but. Yes, they can decide for themselves whether they want to be under God's rule or the rule of a human monarch. Yes, but you need to understand the repercussions of this choice. So Samuel is instructed by God to inform them of what to expect when they have a human king. And it is a long list of negatives, of power grabs, of greed and abuse on the part of the ruler. His speech to the people is very sharp and very biting. He outlines for them, step by step, the self-serving way that monarchs operate. That's how it works. God says, yes, you can decide for yourselves, but you need to be aware of the consequences. Yes, but you will pay for it later. The consequences of this kind of decision are going to be harsh according to the message that Samuel gives them. Samuel describes all the ways a human ruler will abuse them. Conscripting sons for military service, conscripting daughters to mix ointments and bake and cook, taking eminent domain over fields and vineyards and olive orchards. The ruler's going to steal servants and livestock and effectively make them into slaves. I wonder, and some scholars have posited, that this warning about what a king was going to do was actually written later after they'd already experienced a king doing some of these things. After they'd experienced the reign of King Solomon, they had kind of learned that Solomon put into place many of these practices. He conscripted the men to go to Lebanon and get the cedars and bring them back to build his palace and to build his temple for God. Maybe it was the selfish habits of monarchs that they'd already seen that created the words of Psalm 72, the prayer for the king to be righteous and just. It's a specific prayer to set up a ruler to be just in all of his actions and decisions. So imagine that psalm, Psalm 72. The people are gathered in worship like we are here today. They're praying the words of this psalm, which we read part of them together today, as a new king comes into power. At this point, they know what a righteous king is like and what a selfish king is like. So every time a new king is celebrated, the prayer for him is that he can use God-given justice and righteousness in the way he rules over the people. That he'll be a person who asks God to make him into a king who will have pity on the poor and needy, who will do justice for the poor, and who will deliver those who are in poverty and have been oppressed. It is uncanny, or I might say the work of the Holy Spirit, that this particular text about choosing a human king is assigned in this lectionary we are following for the Sunday right before the Maryland primary in our state, the primary election. I hope every one of you has either already voted by mail-in or gone to early voting, or you're planning to go to the polls on Tuesday. If you haven't registered to vote, you can register on Tuesday when you go to the poll. Just need a state-issued ID and proof of your address, and you can register and then vote right there. If you're registered to vote in either one of our two principal parties in this country, and you think that the primary election is not really of much consequence, think again. Your choice, your vote, your voice does matter. Too many people being apathetic or unable to see what good it does to use their voice to have an impact on the choices of leaders in this country. Oh, I'm just one person, people say. My vote doesn't really matter. Or they say, I don't trust any politician. Lots of people say that. How many votes are not cast that could be because of that kind of thinking? Democratic elections allow for us to make a choice in our leadership. After 200 plus years of having choice in our leadership in this country, we know that some leaders have proven to be more concerned about the lives of the residents in this country, and others have taken the lead, right or wrong, in international affairs more visibly and obviously. I had a civics teacher in high school who would include in his lessons, as we learned about the history of the United States, he would include a grade for the presidents in the past. He'd say, President X gets a C+ in my grading system because and he would give us the reasons. Or he would say, President Y gets an A because whatever he did that in his mind made him getting a grade of A. I can't remember who got what in his assessment, but I do remember being struck that some of the names that I had tended to revere as presidents who were up there high on my list didn't get a high grade from my teacher due to some of the actions or policies or their eventual impact on the development of our nation. Actually, I really don't recall too many of them getting an A. Human leaders, after all, are not going to be perfect. We know the leadership system in this country, and it is not perfect either. Generally, our leaders have not been as severe toward us as those warnings that Samuel gave the people of Israel about a potential monarch. God gave the people the choice. They chose for themselves a human leader, flawed as he might be. We know that the people of Israel continue to be intertwined in their relationship with God, so that's not totally thrown out as they choose a human king. Sometimes their relationship with God is trusting and sometimes not. Sometimes their relationship with God is following God and sometimes not. Sometimes it's making good choices and sometimes not. Not too different, really, from our relationship with God today. When we make our choices in leaders, we should do so carefully, having studied and learned about the candidates so we know our options. With the internet, listening to debates between candidates, reading about the endorsements of one candidate or another in the newspapers, it's easy for us today to learn about a candidate's past record, about her values, about his plans for being a better leader than someone else. Those mailers have been flooding our mailboxes. They can help us learn about the candidates. Some of them turn us off. Some of them attract us. Yes, but our voice is needed. The right to vote is perhaps the most important right we have in a democratic system. It is God who says to us, yes, make choices in your life, but recognize the consequences. Choices of your elected officials, choices of a co-moderator of the Presbyterian Church USA, choices of your elders or pastors to lead your congregation. Make those choices by righteousness and justice, guided by God's commandments. Make those choices with wisdom, both human wisdom and spiritual wisdom. Perhaps we can make those words of Psalm 72 not only our prayer for a leader, but perhaps also a prayer for ourselves, that we might make wise and just choices as we select our leaders at the local, state, and federal level. Following the practice of improv, if you have ever tried to do any improv acting, you learn that if you say yes, but, and cut the other person off, it kind of stops the conversation and you're not building off of each other. So in improv, it's yes, and. So you build on what the other person has said. So if we follow that practice, perhaps, we could shift from yes, but, to yes, and. Yes, I will exercise my right to vote, and I will make informed decisions and choices. Yes, I will make my choices on human leaders, and I will walk and seek God as the ruler of my heart and the ruler of my life. Amen.